I woke up last night and had a genuine panic attack about it, because I suddenly like, well, this is 8 years and it's climaxing, and like, what if we messed it up?
Yes, indeed. Good question. What if you messed it up? It's not his fault, of course. There's no reason he should get the blame. And this isn't the first time that he and the other cast members have betrayed a lack of confidence in the final season of Game of Thrones. Let's take a look, shall we?
If you could describe the season finale of Game of Thrones in one word, how would you describe it?
Disappointing.
Disappointing?
No, epic. I don't know.
Epic.
One of those ones.
Yeah. She didn't say yes. You didn't say yes.
Best season ever!
It's the best. It's the best season ever.
How do you feel about the way that it ends?
There are no better writers in television than Dan Weiss and David Benioff. They ended it brilliantly.
Brilliant man with lots of well thought out practical ideas.
They ended it brilliantly, better than I could have imagined, and
Oh yes, and his personal hygiene is above reproach.
Whoa, I did the great, Homer. I'm impressed.
you people are in for it.
Now, I don't normally make commentary videos like this, but after seeing what they did with episode 3 of season 8 of Game of Thrones, I felt the need to say something. When I saw this episode, I firmly believed that it was not just a significant misstep, the show has made those before, but that it fundamentally broke the show beyond all repair. Much has already been said about this divisive episode in the immediate aftermath of its release, so I thought that I would at least give the show a chance to complete its story before passing final judgment. Now that the rest of the narrative has played out and things have wrapped up, has my initial opinion changed at all? Nothing that happens in this episode makes any sense at all, both in terms of the episode's plot or the overarching narrative of the show. There's a lot to get through, so buckle up my friends and let's get started.
On your mark, get set, terrible. No, but I understand that this is bad.
The Long Night
of Disappointment. And it had all started so positively. The wonderful second episode featured some great character work and some genuinely emotional beats. It set up the battle perfectly. The opening tracking shot of The Long Night is also excellent and one of the episode's highlights. We start with Sam, shivering, either from the cold or just out of plain fear, and then the camera weaves around various familiar faces as the living prepare to face the dead. Outside the castle, the warriors stand stoically ready, and the stillness creates a real sense of oppressive dread, aided by the fantastically eerie score by Ramin Djawadi. We see Sansa and Arya on the battlements, and then Jon and Dany observing from a nearby hill. Melisandre emerges from the night and performs a cool magic trick. The trick of adequate lighting. It's at this point that the episode begins to fall apart. The Dothraki charge and get immediately wiped out.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
What was the purpose of this charge exactly? What was the strategy here? During the charge, we cut to Jon and Dany watching it unfold, and they don't look shocked or upset or angry, so it's clear that they expected this to happen. It was intended. So who ordered this charge and why? Now, we know that Jon isn't the brightest when it comes to battlefield command. Dany, however, is the conqueror of Slaver's Bay. She's already sacked 3 cities, and is the first person to unite all of the Dothraki tribes and get them onto ships and sail them to Westeros. She has also faced the dead before and knows how dangerous they are. Would she really be so willing to send the bulk of her army away from the relative safety of the fortress in such an obviously high-risk attack? This frontal charge may have made a bit more sense if the Dothraki were heavy cavalry, armoured knights with long lances that could easily smash through foot infantry, regardless of how tightly packed they were, like the Knights of the Vale at the ending of Bob, for example. But the Dothraki are not that. They're more like the Mongols. Skilled horse riders for sure, but neither the horses nor the riders are armoured, and they are armed with short swords and bows and arrows, which is the very definition of light cavalry. This type of cavalry are fast and agile, perfect for running down fleeing troops, but not so great for an unsupported frontal charge against a numerically superior force. This is because the momentum of their charge will quickly be lost. And once it is lost, the remaining infantry will quickly overwhelm the now static cavalry. Which is, exactly what did happen. To be fair to John, he did correctly state in the previous episode,
"You can't beat them in a straight fight."
I guess he must have forgotten that, right? Perhaps being dead addled his brain. Danny, I think we should charge the Dothraki straight at the dead. Say what now? The Dothraki should charge right at the dead. It's the last thing they'll expect. Yeah, I don't think that's such a good idea. We have 40,000 Dothraki, which is more than the rest of our army combined. We should probably keep them close to the castle and not split our forces. Plus, they'd be charging into the dark with no support. Yeah, okay, good points. But if we charge, we might catch them off guard. You want to catch the dead off guard. You said we couldn't beat them in a straight fight. That was literally moments ago in the war room. Do you remember saying that? Yeah, but I still think we should charge. What do you say, Danny? Go on then, fuck it, why not? What's the worst that can happen? The only reason for this action that I can surmise is that it made for a cool visual when the flaming swords are extinguished. That's it. Now, I don't deny that this way of showing how the fearsome Dothraki are annihilated while keeping the enemy unseen is neat. The problem is that it comes at the expense of narrative logic, and when you sacrifice believability for cool imagery, you're not doing yourself or your story any favours. It's also a baffling end to a plot thread that goes back multiple seasons. Uniting the Dothraki tribes and convincing them to sail across the narrow sea was a potent example of Daenerys' power as a leader. What was the point of that if they were just going to all get wiped out in the first 10 minutes of the battle? So the Dothraki are gone and the dead close in on Winterfell, and this is where we see the next major problem with the battle strategy. I'm guessing that the showrunners don't play any of the Total War games. Perhaps they should have, as any Total War player could tell you immediately what's wrong with this picture. You never put your siege weapons in front of your battle lines. Siege weapons like catapults and the mighty trebuchet were time-consuming and expensive to build. Remember, these are all built by hand. In pre-industrial times, they were significant feats of engineering. Using them to fire one round and then backing away to leave them out in the open makes no sense. Any experienced commander or veteran of siege warfare would know that these important machines ought to be placed behind the infantry where they are protected and can keep firing on the approaching enemy. Now, if only the heroes had such a person in their ranks.
Sir Jaime Lannister, fabled hero of the Siege of Pike.
Oh, right. I guess they did have someone like that. The dead turn up and the slaughter begins. At least we assume it does from the sound of things, since it's so difficult to see what the fuck is going on. The living are nearly overwhelmed until Daenerys and Jon show up on their dragons and begin torching the dead. This highlights another problem with the Defenders' strategy, which is that they didn't really seem to have a plan for their defense beyond just standing there like lemons and letting the dead smash into them.
Not a great plan.
Movies and TV shows are full of examples of real defensive formations.
Your father should have told you how a phalanx works.
So couldn't Game of Thrones have just borrowed one?
I like it, Arseling. I do.
Why are they all just standing there? They don't seem to have any defensive posture beyond wildly hacking and slashing. Not even the Unsullied, supposedly the most effective soldiers in the world, have much idea of how to construct an effective defense.
A single, impenetrable unit. That is the source of our strength. Each Spartan protects the man to his left, thigh to neck, with a shield. A single weak spot, and the phalanx shatters.
So, of course, they get overwhelmed. This gets to the heart of my problem with this battle. At every stage of the fight, the tactics employed are god-awful and fail immediately. Now, you might think that I'm nitpicking by focusing so much on strategy, but the whole episode is one long battle. In fact, it is now the longest battle scene ever filmed, replacing Helm's Deep from the Two Towers, which had held the title previously. The story of this episode is the story of a battle, so the tactics used do matter. The purpose of a battle scene is not just to generate excitement or horror, we're also seeing how effectively our heroes act in such an extreme situation. When our heroes fail dismally at the first hurdle, and every hurdle after that, then what are we to make of them? Battle sequences are often mini, self-contained stories, and as such, they often have a 3-act structure, particularly during long battles where the enemy is especially difficult to overcome or the odds are against our heroes, like this one. I'll break down this structure using Helm's Deep as an example.
So it begins.
The initial phase of the battle goes well for the heroes. Their defense holds firm, casualties are few, and we can see how effectively they fight.
Nicholas! Two already!
I'm on 17!
I'll go pointy out outscoring me!
Is this it?
Then, the enemy counterattacks, often doing something unexpected that tips the balance. And pushes the heroes to the brink of defeat.
It is over.
Things look bleak.
What can men do against such reckless hate?
But then, when things are at their most desperate, the heroes find some way to regain the initiative.
Ride out with me. Ride out and meet them.
And get some kind of deliverance.
The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep. One last time. Yes!
This mini 3-act structure can be seen all over the place, not just in defensive battles like Helm's Deep in the Long Night, where the heroes are inside a fortress, or should be, and facing overwhelming odds, but also in pitch battles across open fields,
Watch!
and even modern conflicts.
Disperse, you know what to do.
Attack, response, Deliverance.
Sound the retreat.
Now, I'm not saying that every battle has to follow this structure, but it is an effective way of showing both how capable our heroes are, but also how dangerous the enemy can be. The structure is noticeably absent from The Long Night. The maddening thing is that it has been used in Game of Thrones before. Look at Hardhome, for example. The heroes fight effectively, situation changes, and then final deliverance. Same thing in Battle of the Bastards. Jon Snow and his comrades fight well. The situation turns bleak. And then final deliverance. In The Long Night, the heroes start poorly, continue badly, and are overrun almost immediately. The only explanation I can think of for this happening is that the showrunners and the writers of this episode, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, wanted the dead army to appear panic-inducing, which is the right idea, but the way they did that is contrived to the point of it being unbelievable and out of character for our heroes. There's just simply no way that such an experienced force that have faced the dead before several times would make such basic errors in the most important battle ever fought. I mean, here's another case in point. Why is the defensive trench behind the battle lines? What purpose does that serve except to create an obstacle for the soldiers that bottlenecks their retreat, as clearly shown in this shot? Why not put the trench in front of the troops and light it as soon as they hear the dead approaching? The trench could then stop the dead charging right into the troops and allow the heroes to stab any wights that make it through. Perhaps then Grey Worm wouldn't have had to cut off his own men's escape, leading to the death of half, of the Unsullied. Once inside the castle, there's a brief pause while the dead stack up behind the flaming trench. This is an important moment because it's the first time in the battle that the living have managed to stop the army of the dead, dead in their tracks. They have a chance now to regain the initiative. The Whites are completely stationary and within striking distance. How do we imagine they will take advantage of this situation? Hey, guys, come look at this. The dead have stopped. We've actually stopped them. Let's not get carried away. We probably haven't stopped them for long. We need to use this moment effectively. Anyone got any ideas? Anyone? Steve? Any ideas? Yes, I have an idea. Why are we not trying... Wait, there's one. There's one. Well done, that guy. The dead break through the trench and go full World War Z. Not Z, Z, because I'm British. You might think that the castle's defenders would take that opportunity to drop hot oil on the Whites, or perhaps drop the spiked traps that they actually have attached to the walls. But apparently not. What do we know, right? Whites scale the walls and spill over into the castle, and the overwhelming starts anew. Time and again we see familiar characters swamped and virtually covered in whites, but then saved after someone else waves a sword in their general direction, which seemingly causes all of the nearby whites to die of hilarity. Perhaps they'd just seen The Patriot and its depiction of slavery in revolutionary America.
By standing order of His Majesty King George, all slaves of the American colonies who fight for the crown will be granted their freedom with our victory.
Sir, we're not slaves. We work this land. Freedmen.
Oh, then you have the privilege of fighting in the King's army.
To be fair, there is plenty of good action in here. Sure, it's underlit and has been done better in previous episodes, but it's fine, I guess. But just imagine how much more impactful this battle could have been if the living had fought extremely effectively with all of the parts of their defense working in unison, but were still ultimately overwhelmed after the sheer numbers of the dead began to take their toll. How could that have worked exactly? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here I humbly present my alternative version for how the start of this battle could have played out. We start with the same opening tracking shot, because it's great. Then we see Sansa and Arya on the battlements, same as before. Jon and Dany are watching from the hill, and next to them are most of the Dothraki horde. The Unsullied are outside the battlements, in front of the catapults, and safely protected behind the spiked trench. The battlements are filled with Northmen and the remaining Dothraki, with bows at the ready. Melisandre appears, because she has to, I suppose. The dead approach, and the noise they make increases. We see people afraid. The catapults begin firing, and each flaming shot illuminates the advancing horde. Dany wants to use the dragons, but Jon convinces her to wait for the Night King. Melisandre lights the trench, and the dead slam straight into it. The castle defenders begin firing arrows. Huge numbers of whites fall, and the Unsullied take care of the remaining few that make it through the trench. Daenerys gives the nod to the Dothraki, who charge down the hill and smash into the dead from the side, running down thousands of whites, while the castle defenders cheer. At that moment, the Night King appears on Viserion and blasts the Dothraki with blue flame, causing mass casualties. The remaining Dothraki scramble back to Winterfell. Jon and Dany chase after the Night King on their dragons, but he is able to destroy the catapults and part of the battlements before they reach him. This breach causes the Unsullied to retreat inside Winterfell. The dead rush forward, and we see that there is still an enormous number of them. This covers the first act of the battle, the heroes mount a solid defence, and sets up the second act. The enemy responds powerfully. Most of the actions are still the same. The Dothraki charge, the trench is lit, the dead storm into it, the Night King uses Viserion, and Jon and Dany chase after him. but you can see that a few minor changes to the defenders' starting positions and the timing of their attacks could have allowed the Dothraki, the Unsullied, and the Northmen to each make a significant contribution to the battle. Giving them a chance to fight well in the first act makes the second phase of the battle all the more devastating when it is revealed that despite the huge losses inflicted upon it, the army of the dead is barely affected. So what do you think? Let's leave the battle for now and focus on the characters instead. Theon and Bran have been chilling in the Godswood, reminiscing about happy childhood memories. Bran tells Theon he's going now, and this is the point where you might start to think, oh baby, this is what we've been waiting for. Finally, Bran's powerful warging ability will be used to its fullest and... Oh, wait, it's just the Ravens again. Enough with the fucking Ravens, Bran. It's time to step it up a notch, okay, matey? Do you remember when Bran was able to warg into Hodor's body and take control of him? That was all the way back in Season 3, when he was still a wee boy. Even then, he was apparently the most powerful warg alive.
You got inside Hodor's mind.
I can't do that north of the wall.
No one can do that. Anyway.
Now it's been years, and Bran is supposedly so much more powerful after all his Treebeard training. But he still only takes control of some ravens. Perhaps he planned to defeat the Night King through the power of guano. The ability to warg into other creatures is such a mystifying and unique magical power that was so important to Bran's early journey, but has been cast aside like so much else in the frenetic pace of the last 2 seasons. Even if he didn't have this power, you would think that Bran could still have proved useful by looking back in time to the first long night, seeing how the White Walkers were defeated the first time around, and use that information to give the living some kind of edge. I would have thought that having someone who can look back in time and describe exactly how your enemies were defeated in perfect detail would be one of the most powerful advantages you could have. But none of that is used. Instead, Bran simply trolls the Night King by flying alongside him just out of reach.
You're never gonna catch me!
Let's turn to Jon and Dany, who are undoubtedly the 2 big power players here. Surely they will have more of an impact on the course of events? Early indications are good. They burn a load of zombies and have a tussle with the Night King against the striking moonlit sky. This sequence is great, and I especially like the moment where Dany has the Night King in her sights, unleashes the full force of her dragon, and he just shrugs it off with a smirk. The Night King has been a blank, emotionless character for so long that to see him display a flicker of satisfaction adds a deft touch to an already cool moment of badassery. Wait, am I being positive about this episode? Well, let's move on. The Night King goes after Bran, and Jon, now grounded, gives chase. The Night King shoots him a withering stare as if to say, "Not today, bitch!" He then does his hard home bit. This is both cool and dumb. Seeing familiar characters who heroically gave up their lives now returning as whites is chilling, and it makes sense for the Night King to use his powers during this important battle. At least someone does. Bran. It does, however, put Jon Snow in an impossible position. As good a fighter as he is, he can't take on 1,000 whites by himself, or so you would think. A moment later, and another last-minute rescue by Dany and Drogon, and he's just fine and running through the castle. Did all those whites just stand and watch him run past? Are they still standing there now? The Night King's influence even extends to the long-deceased corpses in the Winterfell crypts, so at this point in the battle there must be thousands of new whites just raised. If all of those new whites attacked the remaining castle defenders at once, the battle would be over in minutes. But of course that doesn't happen because... reasons. Jon Snow gets through the castle and nearly to the Godswood, but undead Viserion turns up and torches the place. The Night King is already there, with the other White Walkers. This is the first time we've seen the other White Walkers since Jon Snow spotted them on their undead horses behind the army of the dead. The Walkers are the most fearsome enemies in the world, but they haven't actually done anything in this battle. They're just kind of there, shadowing the Night King while he does his slow-motion strut, like some kind of undead Backstreet Boys.
Oh my God, we're again.
The King in the North is still stuck behind a small wall, and in frustration he tries to outshout a dragon. The Night King is about to kill Bran, but before he can draw his weapon, Arya sneaks past 3 White Walkers and gets the win with her Inigo Montoya switcheroo moment.
I admitted you are better than I am. Then why are you smiling? Because I know something you don't know. And what is that? I am not left-handed.
The Night King dies and the Great War is over. There are numerous reasons why this outcome is so disappointing, but it has nothing to do with Arya being the one to kill the Night King. Yes, she's a trained assassin with magic powers of her own, so it does make some kind of sense that she'd be able to get close enough to do the needful. But that didn't alleviate the crushing sense of disappointment that my friends and I felt when this happened. To understand why, let us consider the whole narrative, characters, and theme. The threat posed by the White Walkers goes right back to the very first episode, 184 years ago. There is only one character whose entire arc has centered around confronting that threat. This guy. No. This guy. Should he have been the one to dispatch the Night King? It's debatable. In the behind-the-scenes featurette for the episode, the showrunners stated they did not want Jon Snow to kill the Night King because they thought he would look too heroic.
We hope to kind of avoid the expected, and Jon Snow has always been the hero, the one who's been the savior, but it just didn't seem right to us for this moment.
So, they were fine with him being miraculously resurrected like Jesus, becoming a savior to the wildlings.
They think you're some kind of god.
Also like Jesus.
He died for us.
Becoming the revealed as the true heir to the Iron Throne, leading an expedition to capture a White where he was miraculously saved at the last second, not once, but twice.
Uncle Benjamin.
Riding a dragon and wandering past 1,000 Whites unscathed, but they didn't want him to cross the finish line in case that was what made him look too heroic. Does that sound a bit stupid to anybody else? It's a bit late in the day to have your hero not be a hero. If you want Arya to kill the Night King, fine, but at the very least you should have your main hero figure do something useful. Aragorn wasn't the one to kill Sauron, but he still put the effort in.
By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand! Men of the West!
Fuck yeah! What was Jon Snow's contribution in the biggest confrontation in history? Getting stuck behind a small wall and shouting at a dragon. Even Lyanna Mormont manages to kill a zombie giant before checking out like a boss. So this 13-year-old girl has a greater impact on the Battle of Winterfell than Jon Snow, the only character who has been fighting these creatures since Season 1. What exactly was the point of his resurrection? Was there a point?
Stannis was not the prince who was promised, but someone has to be.
Guess again.
Establishing a hero's arc for your character and then cutting off the last piece of it does not add realism or make him appear any less like the hero. It's just bad storytelling. So Jon Snow does nothing at all. Bran does nothing at all. The Dothraki do nothing at all. And the White Walkers do nothing at all. In Hardhome, a single White Walker was terrifying, and defeating him took everything that Jon Snow had. The Walkers have been planning this invasion for 1,000 years, yet not one of them even draws their weapon. This is the longest battle ever filmed, the most expensive TV episode ever filmed, and the culmination of 8 years of mostly patient build-up. In a show that has featured stunning battle after stunning battle after stunning battle. This ought to have been the pick of the bunch. Instead, it's an underlit, hard-to-watch mess with god-awful tactics that fails to use its most powerful characters in any meaningful way, apart from Arya, obviously. Jon, Dany and the Dothraki could have all stayed on the hill and the outcome probably wouldn't have changed. In fact, everyone could have left Winterfell except for Bran and Arya. They didn't actually need Dany's army at all, really. It's as if the show's creators forgot about the previous 8 years of story and character development and focused only on the plot of the episode at hand, except that they also screwed that up as well. I still could have forgiven all of that, however, if the show hadn't committed its very worst sin. I mentioned before that the threat of the White Walkers was established in the first episode. It was actually the first scene of the first episode. Right from the get-go, an overriding theme was created that there is an existential threat that we need to pay attention to because if we don't, it will be the end of us. Yet even as the threat grows, most people are either ignorant or dismissive of it.
The madman sees what he sees.
And instead of coming together to address it, we weaken ourselves with petty wars that are destructive to all sides. It's an incredibly potent theme for our times, with the White Walkers and their army often assumed to be a fantasy representation of real-world man-made global catastrophes such as climate change, environmental destruction, or the threat of nuclear conflict. Now perhaps you think that George R.R. Martin did not actually intend the White Walkers to be allegorical, and you might be right. The Walkers, or others, as they are known in the books, have a more complicated relationship with humanity than is portrayed in the show. It's hard to deny, however, that the TV adaptation has portrayed them as a straightforward threat to all people that would only be overcome if everyone was prepared to come together for this one purpose.
The long night is coming, and the dead come with it. No clan can stop them. The free folk can't stop them, the Night's Watch can't stop them, and all the Southern Kings can't stop them. Only together. All of us. And even then it may not be enough, but at least we'll give the fuckers a fight.
She never had any intention of sending her army north.
So that didn't happen, and yet the Night King was defeated anyway. This is what breaks the show beyond all repair. There is now no way back from this point, and the narrative descends into farce. They had established from day one and continued to sustain over multiple years a powerful overarching theme that our petty human concerns do not matter because there is something far more consequential that needs all of us to set aside our differences. And then they pull the rug out right from under us. I understand what they were trying to say, that the threat to our survival is not the other, it is within ourselves. However, this doesn't work.
It's almost a relief to confront a comfortable, familiar monster like my sister.
Wrong! That's wrong!
Why doesn't it work? Well, partly it's because at this stage of the story it simply isn't credible to expect the audience to believe that the real threat is not a terrifying necromancer that can raise an army of the dead and cover the world in an endless night, but actually a pregnant lady who drinks a lot and a jolly pirate with an anal obsession. But mostly it's because the White Walkers were already a product of humanity's tendency to destroy and conquer. They were a weapon, whose creation humans were ultimately responsible for because we waged a genocidal conflict against the other life that occupied the land before us.
You made the White Walkers.
We were at war. We were being slaughtered. Our sacred trees cut down. We needed to defend ourselves.
From whom?
From you. From men.
The main theme of the narrative is therefore shattered right at the end of the show as the showrunners try to convince us that the end product, the result of our obsession with violence and power, is not the issue, it's our obsession with violence and power that's the issue. Do you see what I mean about this not making any sense? This is some grade A Lost level bullshit. For any teenagers out there, or people from the future, who may not be familiar with Lost, It was a TV show from the noughties that was kind of like the Game of Thrones of its day, in that it was a big budget, global smash hit that set new standards for TV production values and visual effects. Featured a huge cast of characters that they weren't afraid to kill off. And mysterious adversaries. Also, like Game of Thrones, it provoked much debate and fan theorising as to what the outcome would be. And also, like Game of Thrones, it ended with an unsatisfying whimper, with the only real revelation being that the show's creators were not nearly as clever as we initially thought they were. Since Lost does not stand up to repeat viewings, it is now fading from the cultural memory. Game of Thrones is, on the whole, a much better show than Lost ever was, but that only makes its fall from grace even harder. Whereas the ending of Lost merely caused disappointment, the response to Game of Thrones' final act has been a bit more... Several of the show's stars have since come out in defense of this episode and of the final season, pointing out how difficult it was to film and how hard everybody worked on it. I don't deny that a lot of effort was put in by numerous very talented people. It's not their contribution that's at fault. It's the fact that all of their hard work was in service of such a dismal script, and there are only two people at fault for that.